begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin, for dedicating the Sherman Joshos this month, and the zechus of refuah shlema for their niece Chava Tzipporah bas Chaya Malka. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she together with Kol Cholei Yisroel will have a complete and enduring refuah. Also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Tzadik Gimel 93. Really exciting daf ahead of us. We are picking up Emir Hashem on Tzadik Beis Amud Beis 92b. And we left off, let's actually pick up with Amar Rabbi Yanai, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. We actually got a little bit further down, but let's start there. A nice departure point for today's daf. Amar Rabbi Yanai, Bechabura nimnu v'gamru, in Kiddushin Tovsin B'Yevamos. In our Chabura, in our Shir, we decided, right, we took a poll, and we decided that at the end of the day, in Kiddushin Tovsin B'Yevamos, that Kiddushin does not take effect with a Yevam. So also remember again, let's review this case. We're dealing now with the case, Ruvain is married to Rachel. Ruvain dies without children. Rachel falls to Yibum, to Ruvain's brother Shimon. So now what's the shaila? The shaila is if Rachel goes ahead and accepts Kiddushin from Zvulun, an unrelated man, so does that Kiddushin work or not? So remember, we saw in yesterday's daf, that is a fundamental machlokes. What is the machlokes based on? The machlokes is based on the interpretation of a pasuk. The pasuk says, this was on the second line from the top, on Tzadik Beis Amud Beis 92b, Lo sia eshes hames hachutza leish zar. The wife of the deceased brother shall not be to the outside to a strange man. Which again, the pasuk is telling us that the Yevama should not marry someone other than her Yavam, right? She shouldn't marry someone other than her brother-in-law. The fundamental machlokes is, how do we view that phrase, or how do we understand that phrase of lo sihya? Does lo sihya mean it's a lav, it's a prohibition for her to marry someone other than her brother-in-law, but technically speaking, the marriage works? Or no, lo sihya means what? Lo sihya is lashon havia, is lashon of kiddushin. There's no kiddushin in such a situation. So remember again, so we had Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav, that it means there's no Kiddushin. Shmuel said, I'm mesupok. I'm not sure if there's Kiddushin. Say, thank you so much. Don't be sorry, Chas v'shalom. I'm sorry to make you serve me like this. Thank you. So Said's taking table orders, by the way. On his way back, just tell him what you need. Say thank you. So remember again, so that's the shaila. Does it mean that there's no kiddushin, or does it mean ultimately that it's usher? I don't know why this keeps falling out. Okay, that's the shaila. So remember again, we had Rav saying it means there's no kiddushin. Shmuel saying I'm mesupok. I'm not sure exactly what it means, and therefore Shmuel would mandate a get out of Safek. So now the Gemara is saying Rabbi Yanai said, in the Shir, we decided that halacha l'maisa kiddushin doesn't take place. There's no kiddushin with the Yevama. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi, lo mishnah seinuhi. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi, isn't this a mishnah? Disnan. Ha'omer le'isha re'at mekudeshes li la'achar she'zgayer, la'achar she'tizgairi, la'achar she'ishtachrer, la'achar she'tishtachreri. So it's actually a very interesting case. Right? We're going to talk about this case. We're going to delve into it a little bit more because this case actually enters into a number of different halachas. So listen to this. A man says to a woman, become my wife after I convert. So this is actually an interesting case. So right now, the guy is a Gentile. He says to a Jewish woman, I'm in the process of conversion. Let me be mekadesh you now, right? So that you'll become a gudeshes to me after I convert. So he's making the Tnai Kiddushin now for it to be chal after he goes out and converts. Or again, a Jewish man says this to a non-Jewish woman, just the reverse case. Or la'achar she'ishtachrer, or right now, he's an Eved Kanani. So he said, right, a Jewish man goes over to an Eved Kanani goes over to a Jewish woman, says, become mikudeshes to me when I am emancipated. Or la'achar she'tishtachreri, or after you're emancipated. Or this is an interesting one, li'achar sheyamos ba'alech. Right? A man goes over to a woman, become mikudeshes to me after your husband dies. Maybe don't tell him right now, right? After your husband dies. or la'achar shetamus achoseich. Or let's say again, a man is married to Rachel. He wants to marry Rachel's sister Leah. Can't marry two sisters. So he says to Leah, become mikudeshes to me after your sister dies. Or la'achar sheyachlotz leYevimech. Or become mikudeshes to me after your brother-in-law does chalitza with you. Eina mikudeshes. So both saying all of these cases, she's not mikudeshes. Now both say, the truth is, this is an interesting, these are all interesting cases, which we're going to get into in just a moment. The reason why Rabbi Yochanan is bringing this up is for that last case. A man says to a woman, so let's imagine the following scenario. A man says to a woman, so now Zvulun goes over to Rachel. He says, Rachel, become mikudeshes to me, right, after your brother-in-law Shimon does chalitza with you. So the Gemara says, Eina mikudeshes. It doesn't work. The Rabbi say, we're assuming, why doesn't this work? Why doesn't this work? Because you can't do chalitza, you can't do kiddushin with a woman who is subject to yibum. And since Rachel, at the time of this Tanai, ultimately is subject to yibum, therefore halacha l'maisa, kiddushin with her does not work. Even though this is a kiddushin al Tanai, it doesn't work. So therefore Rabbi Yochanan is bringing this as a proof. You see from here, that you cannot affect kiddushin with a woman who is subject to yibum. That's Rabbi Yochanan is bringing this up. So this is actually very interesting. So he says back, Rabbi says back, Amarlei, ilav de dalai lecha chaspa, mi mashkachas maganisa to say. So Rabbi responds, Rabbi Yochanan shkoyach. But had I not removed, literally again, the piece of clay, would you not have found the jewel? In other words, okay, beautiful, you're bringing this Mishnah. But the reason you're bringing this Mishnah as a proof is why? Because I laid the groundwork for you to discover this. So ultimately, you're going to say, so fine, good, beautiful idea. I will say, now we're going to go back and talk about this Mishnah in just a bit. But what seems to come out over here, look at Rashi. Ilav meshkachet marganisa. Rashi says over here, actually, let's take a look at Rashi. Eina mekudeshes. Kevan da hashtalo tafsi ba kiddushi lekame nami lo tafsi de'ina da makna davar shelo b'liolam. We're going to come back to that point in just a bit. So we'll say the idea over here that the Gemara has just proven or seemingly proven is that halacha l'maisa, a woman who is subject to yibum cannot go ahead and accept kiddushin from another man. Now, this last case that was mentioned is different than anything else because this is what's called kiddushin on Tanai, but nevertheless, it's brought up as a raya. So I will say, before we go ahead and delve into this, how do we pass halacha l'maisa? Because now we're going to take a little bit of a turn, because this Mishnah introduced another fascinating idea about being makne adavar shelo bali olam. Literally, again, going ahead and acquiring something that is not yet in existence. So we'll come to that in just a moment. How do we pass halacha l'maisa? So let's listen to this. The Rambam in Hilchos Ishus Perek Daled Halacha Yud Daled writes as follows. The Rambam says that in general, right, we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva, which means we hold kiddushin tofsin b'chayvei lavin. Right? So you say, thank you so much. Right? We hold that kiddushin takes effect even with a lav, even in a situation of a lav. Now, interestingly enough, listen to the lashon of the Rambam. The Rambam writes, "Nistapek lechachamim ima kiddushin tofsin biyevama kishar chiyuvei lavin o ein kiddushin tofsin ba ke'erva." Rabbi say this is absolutely riveting. Chazal were mesupak about what happens. So again, case we started out with this morning. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Rachel falls to Yibum to Shimon. Zvulun comes along, unrelated guy. Zvulun, unrelated guy, gives kiddushin to Rachel. Does that kiddushin work or not? The Rambam paskins halacha l'maisa. It's a suffix. It's a suffix. What is the suffix based on? Again, the top of yesterday's daf. What's the suffix based on? How do you interpret the pasuk? Lo siya eshes hames hachutza liish zar. Is it that there's no kiddushin? There's no kiddushin? Or that ultimately, again, there is kiddushin, but it's asr? The Rambam says it's a suffix. It's a suffix, and therefore, when the Shulchan Aruch paskins as well, v'afa pisha asr lichnos no. I'm sorry. Olav oin kiddushin tov sebal ke'erva. V'afa pisha asr lichnos achas mikoleila harizim megarish get. So therefore, because it's a suffix, you'd have to give a get. You'd have to give a get. So we'll say, just fascinating. That's how the Rambam paskins halacha l'maisa, like Shmuel. Shmuel says we're not sure what we're not sure how to interpret the pasuk. Is it an isser? Is it an isser? But the kiddushin works, or ultimately, again, it's a safek. That's supposed to have the halacha l'maisa. Quite fascinating. So I will say, let's go weiter. Amali Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is Rabbi Yochanan. Ilav de kalsach gavra rabba, were it not that a great man went ahead and Rebbe, right, and complimented you, Hava amin lacha, ana masnisin Rabbi Akivahi. I would tell you that Mishnah that you just quoted, the Mishnah you just quoted, reflected Rabbi Akiva. See, Rabbi say, let's go back for just a moment, because now we're going to blow open a whole new discussion, which is absolutely fascinating, which is that Rabbi Akiva holds, Ein kiddushin tovsin b'chayve lavin. So Rabbi say, so I would have thought that maybe in the cases that we just quoted over here before, ha'omer le'isha, all of these cases where a man is trying to affect kiddushin now, let me say differently. He's affecting kiddushin to be chal at a later date, right? Become my wife after I convert. Become my wife after you convert. Become my wife after I'm emancipated. After you're emancipated. After your husband dies. After my wife dies. So on and so forth. I would have thought the reason why the Mishnah says it's not mikudeshes is because it's Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva holds in kiddushin tovsim b'chayve lavin. To which the Gemara says, "V'i Rabbi Akiva, ki amar la la'achar shiach lo tzla yivimech litvisi ba kiddushin, da hashamina le Rabbi Akiva da amar adam makne davar shelo bali olam." Then I will say, there's another problem in this Mishnah. What's the other problem in this Mishnah? This is so fascinating. The ability to go ahead and attach a t'nai, or to create a reality with something that is not yet in existence. I will say, give you a perfect example. Let's use the first example as the best one. A man says to a woman, become my wife after I convert. After I convert. See, I will say, right now, a man is trying to affect marriage with what? With what? With a future self. Right? His present self, who is not Jewish, does not have the ability to affect marriage. He wants to affect marriage with a future self. That is called a davar shelo ba li'olam. So now we'll say, now the shaila is, what's the halacha when you go out and try to create realities with something that is not yet in existence? Rabbi Akiva happens to be of the opinion that you cannot go ahead and acquire something that is not yet in existence. This nan, Rabbi say, top of Tzadik Gimel. This nan, listen to this case. Fascinating case. Konim shani osa leficha. Rabbi say, let's say a woman says to a man, I hereby make a konam. Konam is a neder, type of neder, that anything I produce with my hands, you cannot get benefit from. So she's trying to go ahead and prevent her husband from benefiting from her ma'aseh yadayim, from her actions, from her livelihoods, right? Konim sha'ani osa leficha. So literally anything I create, Rashi says over here, Isha sha'amra lebayla, ma sha'ani osa malacha, yehe asra leficha b'konim. Whatever I create, whatever malacha I do, you should not be able to go ahead and get any benefit from. So what's the halacha? A man doesn't have to annul such a neder. Why not? Rashi says over here, the kabbalah shabda lein l'maisiyadeh lo matzya nidra. For one simple reason, a man already has a right to his wife's earnings. So because he has a right to his wife's earnings, she can't prohibit him from something that is rightfully his. Okay, so therefore the neder essentially is ineffective. Watch this. So the Gemara says, Ha'itmar Rabbi Akiva Omer Yafer Shematadif Alav Yosra Min Harai. Ultimately, again, Rabbi Akiva says, no, you should annul the neder. Why? Because Rabbi say, a man has a certain level of entitlement to his wife's earnings. But after a certain threshold, right, after her earnings surpass a certain threshold, he no longer has rights. So if the husband doesn't annul the neder will devolve upon those additional amounts. So I will say, what do you see from here? Now, what is this an example of? This is an example of making a t'nai on what? Or making a neder based on what? Something that is not yet in existence. And yet you see that Rabbi Akiva says, your husband really should annul the vow. Because if he doesn't annul the vow, then halacha l'maaseh he's going to be precluded from benefiting from those we'll call surplus earnings. So Rabbi says, see from here. Should look at Rashi. Shematan defa. Actually, don't look at Rashi. Because the Gemara says, "Ha'ik ma'allah Amrav Rabbi Yoshua ba'omeres yikanshu yadai la'osehem, de'yadayim isnuhu ba'alma. To which Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua says, no. This is actually not a case of makne davar shalom ali olam. This has nothing to do with acquiring things that don't yet exist. This is something different, Rabbosai. In this case over here, what she's doing is she's being makdish, so to speak, her hands. What she's saying is, my hands are hegdish, which not literal, but what she's saying is, that which my hands produce, ultimately, again, my husband should be precluded from gaining benefit from. So in this case, interestingly enough, she's not going ahead and doing anything with earnings. She's doing something with her hands. And what's the chap with her hands? They exist. So now this is very exciting, because the truth is, it's quite a riveting topic about makna adam davar shalom bali olam, or adam makna davar shalom bali olam. A person's ability to go ahead and make a t'nai, make conditions, acquire, transact business with something that does not yet exist in this world. Now, what we just did over here is, the Gemara just went on record as saying Rabbi Akiva holds Adam makne davar shalo bali olam. Right? Rabbi Akiva holds that a person has the ability to, when we say makne means a lot of things. Makne means you can make an eder, you can make a t'nai, but we're also going to see from a choshen mishpat perspective, from a business perspective, it also means that you could transact business with things that do not yet exist in the world. So now we're going to delve into this. Upliga. Now the truth is, we're going to see that there in fact is a machlokes regarding the position of Rabbi Akiva. Upliga. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Huna. I'm sorry. So listen to this. Upliga Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Huna kirav. V'Rav kirabi Yanai. V'Rab Yanai kirabi Chia. V'Rab Chia kirabi. V'Rebbe kirabi Meir. V'Rebbe Meir kirabi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kirabi Akiva. Okay. All of these positions hold like Rabbi Akiva. All of these are hold Rabbi Akiva. What does Rabbi Akiva say? The Amar Adam Makne Davar Shalo Bali Olam. So all of these opinions are of the opinion that a person has the ability to be Makne a Davar Shalo Bali Olam. So we'll say, so again, like I said, literally what it means is you could acquire something that has not yet come into existence. So we'll say, remember again, like I just said before, multiple ramifications of this. We just saw a marital ramification. We just saw ultimately, again, two marital ramifications in terms of making a t'nai kiddushin, in terms of a woman's earnings. And we're going to see, again, the business ramifications of this as well. Here we go. So we're going to go through each of these opinions, showing how they hold Adam Makne Davar Shala Bali Olam. So here we go. Rav Huna Mahi. So we'll say, where do we see Rav Huna? Where do we see Rav Huna? De'itmar hamocher peros dakel lechavero. So we'll say, listen to this. If a person sells peros dakel are fruits of the palm tree, dates. Person sells dates to his friend. And I will say, now this is no ordinary sale. Look at Rashi. Amocher peros dakel bimosa geshamim. So I will say, what are you really selling over here? Date futures. Date futures, right? The market for date futures. I will say, so what Rashi points out, you're selling it in the rainy season. Remember, in the rainy season, there's nothing on the trees. Nothing on the trees. So you're selling date futures, right? I'm selling you dates that do not yet exist. So Rav Huna says, Ad shelo ba'oli olam yachal lachzer bo. So until those dates come into the world, ultimately, again, you could go ahead and retract. You could retract. Look at Rashi. Ad shelo ba'oli olam im balachzer bo kodem nisan sha'az ha'ilonos motzien yachal lachzer bo. Essentially, either the seller or the buyer have the ability to back out of the sale up until Nisan, because Nisan is when the fruits come on the tree. However, mishaba'u li olam ein yachal lachzer bo. But halacha l'maisa, once the fruits come onto the tree, ultimately, again, you can't retract the sale. Look at Rashi. Mishaba'u li olam ein yachal lachzer bo. T'chi asu chayil zvini. Because, again, once the fruits are on the tree, that's when the sale takes effect. Alba Adam Makne Davar Shala Bali Olam. Therefore, what do you see here, Rabbi saying? Now, remember again, we'll say, look what's happening over here. Rav Huna says, so here's the case. Ruvain is selling Shimon dates, we'll call it in Cheshvan, right? So I'm selling you 2 trees worth of dates for $1,000 in Cheshvan. What does Rav Huna say? Both Reuven and Shimon have the ability to back out of the transaction until when? Till Nisan. What's Nisan? When the fruits appear on the tree. Now, I both say, what do you see from Rav Huna's position? Now, it's true, they both have a back out window, but nevertheless, what do you see? The transaction itself works, right? There's a back out window until Nisan, but the transaction works. The fact that the transaction works, what does that show you? Adam makne davar shela bali olam. That you have the ability to go ahead and transact business and make a binding obligation. The fact that they could back out, Rabbi, say, see, if you held ein adam makne davar shela bali olam, then what would be the halacha when Reuven sells Shimon dates in Cheshvan? What would be the halacha? There's no transaction. There's no transaction. It's like me selling you the Brooklyn Bridge. In other words, I'm selling you something that I don't own. So if you hold ein adam makne davar shela bali olam, then a transaction for dates in Cheshvan shouldn't work. The earliest time you could transact business with dates would be when? Nisan. The fact, so don't get confused by the fact that Rav Huna holds that both buyer and seller could back out until Nisan. They could back out until Nisan, but the transaction works as a Cheshvan. Therefore, Adam Makne Davar Shalav Al Yom. So we'll say that's Rav Huna. So what we're just trying to show is how every single one of these opinions holds Adam Makne Davar Shalav Al Olam. Next, Rav Nachman. What does Rav Nachman say? Af misha ba'oli olam yachal achzerbo. So we'll say Rav Nachman says the truth is, even once the dates come into the world, ultimately you have the ability to go ahead and back out of the sale. So we'll say this is machlokes about this case, right? Even once the dates, even in Nisan, they have the ability to go ahead and back out. Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says Modina di ishamet va'achil. Lo mafkina minei. But Allah Chalamayis will say, even though I agree that both have the ability to back out of the sale, if Shimon the buyer was proactive and came Nisan, he scaled that palm tree and collected his dates, we don't extract the dates from his possession. Okay, so fine, Abba say that's just a side of machlokes by this case. What we want to take from there is Rav Huna, right? So we're trying to line up all of these different opinions, ultimately again, who side with Rabbi Akiva, who say Adam Makne Davar Shela Bali Olam. So we've got Rav Huna, number one. Next, Rav. Da Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Listen to this. So I'll say, what about Rav? Where do we see Rav? So Rav Huna is in the name of Rav. Ha'omer lechaveiro sadazu shani lokeach l'she'ekechena kinu yilachame achshav. So I'll say, a very interesting case. A person says to his friend, this sada, this field, sadazu, shani lakeach. When I purchase it, the moment that I purchase it, it should become yours as of now. All right, so we'll say, so what's the case? Look at Rashi. Homer lechavero, kodem shekana sasada, kana, v'havile matana, amim Rav Shmuel. So we'll say, here's the case. I go over to Reuven and say, Reuven, I'm going to buy a field from Shimon. And when I buy the field from him, I want to automatically transfer it over to you as a gift from the moment that I purchase it. So I'll say, what am I doing? I'm making a matana agreement, right? And I could even be drawing up a shtar, right, regarding a transaction. I'm entering into a legal agreement with Shimon regarding what? Something I don't own, about a field that I'm going to buy. So I'll say, what's the halacha? It's a binding agreement. So once again, I'll say, what do you see? Adam makne davar shela bali olam. Incredible. Rabbi Yanai. So what's Rabbi Yanai's case? Here we go. So just lining everybody up on Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Yanai havale arisa. This is also such an interesting case. Rabbi Yanai had a sharecropper. Now I will say again, remember sharecroppers worked in one of two different, we saw this already back in Brachas, one of two different types of arrangements. Sharecroppers sometimes gave a percentage of the field to the landowner, or just gave a set amount of crop, 50 bushels, or whatever, right? So again, that's not material to this story, just an interesting fact. So Rabbi Yana had a sharecropper. Listen to this. The sharecropper used to bring Rabbi Yana a basket of fruit every Erev Shabbos. So it's actually interesting. It's not clear. Tosfos has a whole discussion over here also about whether or not this was payment for the field. Okay, whatever. It doesn't really matter. He brought him a basket of fruit every Erev Shabbos. So we'll say, now remember, just the unspoken part of this Gemara was, so Rabbi Yanai would get the fruit, and what would he do? He would tithe it before Shabbos, because you're not allowed to tithe produce on Shabbos. Okay, so what happened? Hahu Yoma Nagile Velo Asa. It was one Erev Shabbos, the sharecropper didn't show up, he was running late. So we'll say Rabbi Yanai has a problem. Not a problem. What's the issue? The issue is he's nervous the sharecropper is going to show up on Shabbos, or too close to Shabbos, for Rabbi Yanai to separate out Shumas and Maisros. So what does Rabbi Yanai do? Also, so what does he do? A shakel esremi peri debesi alahu. So Rabbi Yanai did something very interesting. What he did is he essentially took Shumas and Maisros from untithed produce in his home on the basket that would arrive. So in other words, he proactively took Trumas and Maisros on a basket of fruit that was not yet in his possession, but that he expected to come into his possession. Interesting, very interesting. So the Gemara says, so he came before Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia said to him, Rabbi Chia said, Shkoyach, great job. Why? So the Gemara says, the Sanya, both is fascinating. Leman silmat liras Hashem elokecha, kala yamim. So we'll say the pasuk over here says, it's just to give you the whole pasuk. V'yachaltuf ne Hashem elokecha b'makom she'ivcha l'shakein shemo sham, ma'asar digancha siroshcha v'yitzarecha u'bechoros bekarecha v'tzonecha leman. So we'll say this is talking about the obligation to go and eat meiser sheni as well as bechar behema, right, in Yerushalayim. So the pasuk is talking about the consumption of trumas and maisros, and the Torah says, or actually at least maisros, l'man silmat liyiras Hashem elokecha kol hayamim, so that you should learn to fear Hashem all of your days. And I both say, what's interesting is the end of that pasuk doesn't really seem to fit with the subject of the pasuk, right? The pasuk is talking about consumption of tithes in Yerushalayim. So what do you mean, l'man silmat liyiras Hashem elokecha kol hayamim? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, "Lemay hilchasa." What is that pasuk coming to teach me? To which the Gemara says, let's listen to this. La asure umechal. Right? I'm sorry. Lemay hilchasa. What is it coming to teach me? So I'm sorry. I skipped. Kol yamim elu shabbasas yamim tovim. What does it mean that you should come to fear Hashem all of your days? All of your days refers to Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shabbos and Yom Tov. Look at Rashi. Kol yamim elu Shabbos Yom Tov. Have a lamar lizar shaloli batel onik Shabbos b'shel tikunat havel. It teaches about say what does it mean that you should fear Hashem all of your days? All of your days means Shabbos and Yom Tov. Meaning what? Make sure to take care of your trumas and maisros before Shabbos, so that you're not precluded from oneg Shabbos. How would you be precluded from enjoying the Shabbos? If your produce is tevel, is untithed, ultimately you'll be precluded from going ahead and enjoying it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, all right, what does this mean exactly? How does the pasuk teach me this? If you're telling me that the Torah is telling me that technically speaking, I'm permitted to go ahead and tithe on Shabbos, I know that. It's tzrich kra l'mishri. So the Gemara says, so let's listen to this. Remember, tithing on Shabbos, midaraisa is mutter. The reason we don't tithe on Shabbos is why? It's midrabanan, tikun mana. It has the appearance of fixing something, right? Because again, you're changing status. Anytime you change status, it's asur midrabanan. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over inema Yisroel b'Shabbos mechal v'tzrich lashmoinan da'afagav the Shabbos hu metakin pshita v'chi itzrich kra the mishrei tilto d'rabanan afashos ma'asos b'Shabbos. I will say now the Gemara goes on. If you want to say it's the mishrei tiltol, maybe it's to say that you could go ahead and, technically speaking, you're permitted to move tevel. That's also permitted. Why? Because l'maisa, again, I will say tiltol, muktzah, is dirabanan. So what is the pasuk coming to teach me? Ella amud beis, Ella lav ki gavna. Rather, what the pasuk is teaching me is like this. The pasuk is teaching me that you are permitted to proactively tithe on Erev Shabbos in order to go ahead and what? Make sure that your produce is ready to go on Shabbos itself. Now, both say this is a very important halacha because in general, so both say we're just trying to figure out what is the pasuk coming to teach me l'gavei Shabbos. If it's coming to teach you that you could tithe on Shabbos, we know that technically you're allowed to tithe on Shabbos with daraisa and not midrabanan. If it's telling me about tiltal, moving tevel or moving shumas and maestros, I know that maker, then I could do that on Shabbos as well. It's only asur midrabanan. So what is the pasuk coming to teach me? Pasuk coming to teach me that Allah Chalamayse could proactively tithe on Erev Shabbos in order to ready produce for Shabbos consumption. And what's the chiddush in that, Rabbosai? Normally, how do you tithe produce? Right? Tithing 101 is 2 words. Min ha-mukaf. Min ha-mukaf means the produce that you are tithing has to be in proximity. It has to be there. It has to be there. The chiddush is that in order to ensure that produce is Shabbos ready, Shabbos Yom Tov ready, what can you do? You could tithe even shalom min ha-mukaf, even if the produce is not in proximity. As Rabbi Yanai. As Rabbi Yanai did, I will say in this case, what did Rabbi Yanai do over here? Rabbi Yanai proactively tithed based on a basket of produce that was going to come sometime later in the day. And I will say, aside from a Shumas and Maisra's perspective, what else do you see? That Adam makne davar shalom ali olam. See, I will say, for our purposes, what this shows is you can go ahead and affect change or affect transactions with something that is not yet in existence. Because I will say, at the end of the day, as much as Rabbi Yanai knew that this basket was coming, nevertheless, what? It wasn't there. It wasn't there. And even though it was not there, Rabbi Yanai was able to separate out Shumas and Maisros. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amalei. So I will say, so now Rabbi Yanai goes ahead. Now remember, I will say, just this exchange comes about. So Rabbi Yanai went ahead, right? Rabbi Yanai has a sharecropper. He proactively separates out Shumas and Maisros. Now remember, again, he went to Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia gave him a shkoyach. What was a shkoyach based on? The pasuk. Leman silma liras Hashem alakecha kol hayamim elu shabbasas v'yamim tovim. So he told him, the pasuk says that on Shabbos and Yom Tov you have to be proactive. How do you have to be proactive? Tithe. You did great. You did great. Rabbi Yanai says, I'm not sure if I did great because Amalei v'karyin b'chalma kana rotzutz. I had a dream, and in my dream I saw a splintered reed. And apparently I took the splintered reed as an omen that maybe I didn't do the right thing. So the Gemara says, My love hachi ka'amrili, hine batachti lecha al mishena sakana harotzot sazeh. So Rabbi Yanai said, according to the pasuk from Malachim Beis, right, where the Navi gives Klal Yisrael Musar, you have literally, again, put your faith on a splintered reed. So Rabbi Yanai said, I saw the splintered reed in my dream. Isn't that an omen that maybe I did the wrong thing? So the Gemara says, he said to him, Lo, hachi kamar lecha. So to which Rabbi Chia said, no, this is what it's saying. Kana ratzutz lo yishbar upishtake lo yichabena. Ultimately, again, the splintered reed shall not break. Say again, I will say splintered reed is used in two different contexts. One says a musar for something bad, one says an omen for something good. Said the omen that you saw was an omen from Shamayim that you had done. I shouldn't say the word omen, right? What you saw was a good siman. Ultimately that what you did was correct. So I will say this is the proof that Rabbi Yanai holds that halacha l'maisa adam makne davar shalom bali olam. So I will say, so again, the proof is he was able to separate out Shumas and Maisrus on produce that he did not yet own. But I'll just mention, I saw a beautiful, beautiful idea in the Sefer Mishnas Yosef. He brings down something amazing. He says, the Gemara is learning from this pasuk, Leman silmad liyiras Hashem l'kecha kol hayamim, you shall learn to fear Hashem all these days. That refers to Shabbos and Yom Tov. So learning to fear Hashem refers to Shabbos and Yom Tov. Granted, it's in a specific context. Why is the notion of yiras Hashem associated with Shabbos and Yom Tov? So the Mishnas Yosef says something so beautiful. Listen to this, I'll quote to you. He says, because on Shabbos and Yom Tov, Sarich lios ala adam yosei yir me'achol. Person has to have more yira, more awe and reverence on Shabbos and Yom Tov than weekdays. Why is that? He said, listen to this. Dehilcho Shabbos karam tluim b'sara. Pen yikashel chas v'shalom ba'av malacho tolda oshus d'rabanon. On Shabbos and on Yom Tov, there are many malachas. Even on Yom Tov, where there's a heter of ochel nefesh, there are so many malachas. And there are avos, and there are toldos. And again, liability for Shabbos and Yom Tov violation is very serious. On the other hand, va'od shehem yimei oneg v'simcha va'alulim lavo lechet. Tzirabah says Shabbos and Yom Tov have this fascinating dialectic. On one hand, you have so many halachas and so many malachas. And you have to be careful with so many things. And yet, on the other hand, you have a mitzvah on Yom Tov of rejoicing, Basra and Yayin, Shabbos, a mitzvah of oneg. So I have the mitzvah to rejoice, but I also have to be hyper vigilant with all of the halachas. So ultimately, says the Mishnah Yosef, that's what it means. Shabbos and Yom Tovim, Shabbos and Yom Tov require this incredible balance between, on one hand, being meticulous with halacha, but yet expressing unbridled and abundant joy through simcha and through oneg, and being able to go ahead and toe that line, being able to go ahead and literally find that balance between, on one hand, oneg and simcha, and on the other hand, profound reverence for the halacha. That's called the yira of Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's such a beautiful, beautiful idea that captures the entirety of the Shabbos and Yom Tov experience. Oneg and simcha on one hand, but at the same time, a hyper-vigilance about the halacha on the other. That's the yira of Shabbos and Yom Tov. Truly beautiful. Anyway, the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Rebbe, we'll say that we're continuing going through our list over here. So what does Rebbe say? Rebbe, the sanya, lo saskir eved aladonov. So also, what does the pasuk mean when it says, do not return a servant to his master? So Rebbe will say, the pasuk shat of the pasuk over here is as follows. That Allah Lamaisa, if an Eved Kanani, runs away to you, do not go ahead and return him to his master. So the Gemara says, Rebbe Omer, Belokeach Eved Amanas L'Shachrer Akasav Medaber. What is the pasuk talking about? The pasuk is talking about if you purchase an Eved on the condition to emancipate him, don't go ahead and change your mind and work him. So the Gemara says, what's the case? Hechidami. The cost of lay, where a person a person will say, I'm purchasing an Eved, and I write him a shtar. And what does the shtar say? The moment I purchase you, you're emancipated. So I will say, what is this an example of? Adam makne davar shalab aliyom. I haven't even bought the servant yet. I haven't even bought him yet. But before I buy him, I write a shtar that says, when I buy you, I'm going to emancipate you. So the pasuk says, don't change your mind. After you make that condition, don't change your mind. Shabbos say, once again, another proof, Adam makne davar shalo bali olam. Rabbi Meir, what does Rabbi Meir hold? Rabbi Meir disnan, ha'omer li isha riat nekudeshes li la'achar she'eskar. This is how this whole discussion started. What's Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir says, a man says to a woman, become mikudeshes to me after I convert, or after you convert, lachar sheshtachar, after I'm emancipated, or after you're emancipated, lachar shiamos ba'aleich, after your husband dies, lachar shetamos achoseich, or now I'm married to your sister after your sister dies, lachar sheyachlos lach yevimeich, or after your brother-in-law does chalitza with you, eine mikudeshes. Ultimately, again, in all of these cases, it does not work. Now, I both say, b'pashtos, why doesn't it work? Ein adam makne davar shalab ali olam. So I will say in all of these cases, first wide line, I will say, in all of these cases, he's legislating a kiddushin, right? He's making a tanai with something that quote unquote does not yet exist. So I will say, again, the easiest way to illustrate this, as I said before, is with the first case. Right now, a man is a Gentile, and he says to a woman, I'm undergoing the process of conversion, become mikudeshes to me when I convert. I will say, right now, he is a davar shalo ba liolam, which I will say, if we think about it, by the way, is such a profound musar, that sometimes a person is a davar shalo ba liolam. I will say, a lot of times in life, I am a davar shalo ba liolam. I have so much potential. But my potential is exactly that, it's potential. And it's unrealized. It's unactualized. The tragedy of life is that sometimes you go through an entire lifetime, and I remain a davar shalo ba liolam. I'm here, I'm kind of here, but fully unactualized. We'll say, isn't that the case of the ger? He's there. I'm ready. I'm not there yet. So by the way, there's only so much that a davar shalo ba liolam could accomplish. Incredible. Rabbi Meir says mikudeshes. Here it is, very simple. Rabbi Meir says all of these cases work. Kiddushin works. Why does it work? Because Rabbi Meir holds that Adam makne davar shalo ba liolam, and therefore again these Tanai Kiddushin ultimately will work. Incredible. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So what's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say? Disanya. Yeser alkin amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So afilu im amar peiros rabosei. So the Bryce is quoting the following case. Yeser alkin amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Afilu im amar peros aruga zu tlushim yutruma al peros aruga mechubarim. So in this case over here, a person is designating one part of his crop as truma on a different part of his crop. So literally he's saying, let the fruit of this row, when they're detached, be truma on the fruit of this row when it's attached. O peros aruga mechubarim, al peros zutalushin lichish. So what's that? Lichisheva ushlish. The Rebbe say he's making all of this tanai even before the crops have grown. So he's making all of these conditions, right? This row should be truma on this row, and as soon as so Rebbe say, so just a very simple, so just a simple illustration. So let's say the fruit or the produce of row A, when they reach 1/3 maturation, ultimately again should become truma, ultimately on the produce of row B. Row B. And when is he making this tanai? Even before the produce has reached 1/3 of its growth. So what's the halacha? Once you go ahead and reach 1/3 of their maturation and they're harvested, ultimately his words are upheld. So we'll say all this is another example of where a person is making a tanai regarding truma of produce, and he's establishing or he's designating certain produce truma on other sections of produce, and he's making this entire tanai before the produce has even grown. Incredible. Rashi says over here, right, Rashi just pointing out over here why the daf could use 1/3. Good. Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, here we go. Rabbi Akiva. And we're going to say this is the end of the road, because remember, all of these opinions were lining up behind Rabbi Akiva. All of them behind Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, what did Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva, disnan konim sha'ani osa leficha, eini sarch lafer. So we'll say, remember again, this was the first case we had on Sadik Gimel Amud Aleph. Right? What does Rabbi Akiva say? A woman says to her husband, I hereby make a neder prohibiting you from getting any benefit from my earnings. Anything I produce with my hands, konam, is prohibited to you. Right? So what's the halacha? Eino tzarich lahafer. We say a man does not have to annul such a neder. Why doesn't the man have to annul such a neder? Why not? Because halacha lamaisa, he's entitled to her earnings as well. Anyway, right? So because he's entitled to it, ultimately she can't make a neder prohibiting him from getting benefit from it. So therefore, Allah Almighty, he doesn't have to annul the neder. Rabbi Kiva says, no, he has to annul the neder. Why yafer? Shematadif alav yasra min haroi. Because Rabbi say, let's say she earns more. In other words, without getting into all the technicalities over here, halacha lamaisa, he's only entitled to earnings up to a certain amount. But if her earnings surpass that threshold, technically, the neder could devolve upon those surplus earnings. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva says he should annul the neder, lest the neder devolve upon the surplus earnings. Now, both say, do the surplus earnings exist? Do they exist? No. Yet Rabbi Akiva is saying the neder would be chal. What do you see from here? Adam makne davar shalo bali olam. So I both say this is very exciting. So therefore, again, I both say we just went through this entire. It's very exciting Gemara when you see like a whole. It's always exciting, like when you can sink your teeth into a sugya. This is a sugya that started from Tzadik Gimel Amud Aleph and has gone all the way to the middle of Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, which is rare, right? Generally, we're all over the place in Gemara, so it's exciting to kind of focus, sink your teeth into a theme. All of these opinions lining up behind Rabbi Akiva, each in their individual cases, but all a common theme throughout every single one of these cases. Adam makne davar shalo bali olam. That a person has the ability to makne, acquire, transact business, convey ownership, acquire ownership, designate shumas maisrus with something that does not yet exist in this world. Okay, so we'll say, so says the Gemara. Now we'll say, the halacha l'maisa, of course, is not as simple, right? The halacha l'maisa, in general, about adam makne davar shalab ali olam, is really, we'll call it a depends situation. In other words, there is not necessarily one uniform halacha when it comes to adam makne davar shalab ali olam, but it's very often case specific. Let's go back to Rabbi Rav Sheshes. Eirechad bi Yevamos mahu. All right, so both say, so now we're jumping back. But again, I both say, okay, if we have time, we'll come back. There's also, okay, let's go back. But I'm going to say, so both say, now we're going back. Remember, Our entire sugya right now has been based on the concept of believing in Eid Echad, right? That's how we started our parak. Eid Echad shows up, tells the woman, your husband died. Your husband died. So Rabbi says, remember again, we saw in yesterday's daf, there's a fundamental machlokes about how we look at an Eid Echad, right? Is an Eid Echad a Maisa Beis Din or Rishus Beis Din, right? When an Eid Echad comes along and Beis Din allows her to remarry based on the testimony of an Eid Echad. So there are two ways we could look at that. That is a Hora'as Beis Din, or, right, that's right, Beis Din is paskening, right? Paskening, or Beis Din is giving her permission. We saw yesterday's daf, what's nafkamina? What's nafkamina? Personal liability for a carbon, right? If it's a Hora'as Beis Din, then there's no personal carbonic liability. If it's kind of just permission, but you bear the responsibility, then there is personal carbonic liability. So we'll say, here's the interesting question. Do we believe in Eid Echad b'Yevama? Now we'll say, what's the case? So look at Rashi. Eid Echad b'Yevama, meyet shemes b'ayla kadesh yavim. So we'll say, here's the case. Rachel's married to Ruvain. Eid Echad shows up and says, Ruvain died. And Rabbi said, now what's going to happen? When Ruvain dies, now Rachel falls to Yibum to Shimon. And Rabbi say, now this is interesting. So do we believe in Eid Echad in that case? Because understand, what's happening over here, Rabbi say, is the Eid Echad is essentially effectively and immediately triggering what? A potential erva situation. So now, based on this, are we going to allow Rachel to marry her brother-in-law? Which in Yibum is a mitzvah, but outside of Yibum is what? Is a pretty major avera. So the Gemara says, time of day, so we'll say, on one end we say, in general, why do we believe in Eid Echad? And we'll say, here's what's interesting. It's fascinating psychology of lying. And we'll say, when do people lie? Not that anyone knows, right? Maybe you have a friend, right? When do people lie? When they know they can get away with it, right? Rarely do people lie. Only you have to be, generally, it's a good sign of significant illness when people lie, even when they know they're going to be caught, right? Or it's a cry for help, right? So I'll say, so at the end of the day, people lie when they know they can get away with it. But something that is going to be found out, people don't lie. The reason we believe in Eid Echad is because you'd be crazy to lie about something like someone died, besides the fact that it's kind of sick, right? Also, Lamaisa, if you're wrong, the guy's going to be standing next to you at the smorgasbord, right, at the chasana. So it's going to get awkward. So lemaisa, it's a milsa da'avida ligiluye. It is something that is going to become revealed. So we generally assume that the reason we believe in Eid Echad is because a person doesn't lie about saying it's going to become revealed. So therefore, I'll say, v'hachanami lo mishaker. Therefore, we assume over here that a person is not going to lie as well. Rabbi said, by the way, what a profound musar, right? Chazal tell us, a person doesn't lie with a milsa da'avida ligluye, right? I only lie about something that I could conceal the truth. But if the truth is going to come out, I'm not going to lie. I will say, what a musar. And I will say, how many times in life do we lie to ourselves about things, right? I tell myself, this is mutter. I know it's not mutter. I tell myself, it's okay to do this. I know it's not okay to do it. But I think I could cover it up. I will say, every single lie we tell ourselves, there's a milsa da'avida ligaluye. It's going to become revealed. Now, maybe not in this world, but every single thing becomes revealed in the world to come. So Rabbi say, now that I know that every single lie I tell myself is a milsa da'avida ligaluye, I have to find the strength to stop lying to myself. Because at the end of the day, you could run, but the truth comes out this world, next world, and the Gemara says, Adam lo meshaker. Smart people don't lie when the truth will be revealed. What a profound musar for each of us to take to heart. Oh, Dilma, time of the Eid Echad mishum deihi daiko min sabah. V'hacha, or we'll say maybe on the other hand, right? In general, why do we believe in Eid Echad? Because halacha l'maisa, we assume both sides that the onus of the edus of the Eid Echad falls upon the woman, right? She's going to do her due diligence and ultimately, again, check the veracity of the claim. And I will say, what do we have to be concerned about in this case? V'hacha. The truth is, from the time that her husband brought her home to meet his family, she always liked his brother better than she liked him. So I will say, so maybe there's the concern that in this case, she's not going to do her due diligence. So I will say, see here the shaila? So the shaila, again, I will say, Can I just say what you see over and over and over is the Gemara struggling with why we believe in Eid Echad. Isn't this incredible? Like the Gemara can't stop grappling with it, because it's so dramatic that we're believing one guy to allow a woman to remarry. And we're just trying to figure out why that is. So here the Gemara is saying, halacha l'maisa. So Eid is coming along and saying, Reuven died, Rachel, you could do Yibum with Shimon. So do we believe him? So do we say on one hand, the reason why Eid Echad is believed is because an Eid is not going to lie about a Milsa David Legluyi, something's going to be discovered. So he's not going to lie and say that Reuven died if Reuven's really not dead, because his treachery will be discovered. So therefore, even in this case, we can allow Rachel to do Yibum. Or maybe no. Maybe the reason we believe an Eid Echad is not really because we believe the Eid Echad. But what we tell the woman is, listen, we're going to let you remarry because Mishum Iguna Akilu Barabanan, because of Aguna, we're going to let you remarry, but the total onus is on you. Total onus is on you. And the shaila just is, are we confident that she's really going to do her due diligence in a Yibum scenario? Or are we concerned that maybe she always liked her brother-in-law? So because she liked her brother-in-law, she's really not going to do her due diligence. And if the Eid Echad is wrong, we're going to be in some serious trouble. So I'll say that's the shaila. That's the shaila. To which the Gemara says, ultimately again, Amrlu Rav Sheshes Tini. So we learn this. We have this in the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? Amru le meis b'nech v'achar kach meis ba'alech. Well, so what does it say in the Mishnah? Eid Echad comes along and says to the woman, right, your son died. Right? Remember again, about this is a case of where a husband and son went overseas. So they say to her, your son died, and then they say to her, your husband died. So we'll say the order is very important. Son died and then husband died, which means what? She's subject to Yibum. V'nis yabma, she did Yibum. V'achar kach amrula chilafad department. And then unfortunately they said to her, oh, we made a mistake. The order was wrong. In fact, your husband died first and then your son. No Yibum. What's talacha? Tate saying, V'havlad rishon v'achron mamzer. So she has to leave her husband, and ultimately again the children are mamzerim. Seichidam, what's the case? Ilema treyu trey. So we'll see if we're talking about a case where it's two witnesses against two witnesses, right? Two witnesses came along and said, the first two witnesses said, your son died and then your husband died. And then the second two witnesses came along and said, no, it was your husband died and then your son died. My chaz is the samchisahani samochahani. I will say when you have two versus two, they cancel each other out. And if they cancel each other out, then pretty much she stays where she is. And therefore, halacha lamaisa, she would be permitted to remain with the yavam. So the Gemara says, va'od, mamzer, safek mamzer. Furthermore, again, the case wouldn't be a mamzer, it would be a safek mamzer. V'chitema lodak. Maybe you'll say that the author of the Mishnah wasn't precise with his wording. No. V'amim diktani seifa, harishon mamzer va'achron ina mamzer, shmamina davke katani. The both say in the latter case of the Mishnah, we know that what the author is very precise with his wording. Elo, lav shmamina chad. The Shabbos say, rather, it must be the cases where what? The original Eid who was showing up was an Eid Echad. It wasn't Eid Echad. Shabbos say, the Eid Echad comes along and says, Meis b'neich uva'achar kach meis ba'aleich. The Eid Echad was coming along and telling the woman, I have terrible news, your son died, and then your husband died. So the Eid Echad is the one who's coming along and telling her that what? That she is subject to Yibum. V'taima, the asi beitrei ashkachu achashua. And then Rabbi say what happens? Then two witnesses come along and say, no, the one witness was wrong. And in fact, what? Your husband died and then your son died. Love hachi mehemin. But Rabbi say, were that not the case? So we're not for the fact that two witnesses came, one witness would be believed. So if Rabbi say, what comes out from the Mishnah? What comes out from the Mishnah? Then not only is an Eid Echad believed to allow a woman to go out and remarry, but an Eid Echad is also believed to what? Allow a woman to do Yibum. So we'll say, we'll stop over here. We're not finished with this. I'm leaving you off in the middle of this sugya. I'll pick up with the Ikad Amr tomorrow, and we'll see the resolution of this particular halacha in Me'eretz Hashem in tomorrow's daf. Shkayach Abosai.